On SmallCapPower today, we're pleased to be with Bruce Campbell, President and Portfolio Manager at StoneCastle Asset Management. Bruce, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so now that we have you in here, let's start the conversation by talking about our economy. So it's been scorching hot for the past few months, and we've had growth exceeding expectations, low unemployment rate, the lowest it's ever been since 2008. But is there anything weak beneath the surface that you can point out for us?
Well, the economy certainly has been very strong. As far as what, any weakness below the surface, I don't necessarily know if there's a lot of weakness, but obviously one of the things that a lot of people are watching for is, the Canadian housing market is a big part of the economy, and what can happen there. We've saw some slowdown in the Ontario market. Is that going to transpire into BC and Alberta as well? And that could actually be a bit of a detractor from the economy, maybe take a little bit of the steam out of it.
Now, with the rate hikes this year, there's been 2 so far. How much higher do you think it'll go, and do you think we'll have another one this year?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big guess on that one, right? I mean, I don't think too many people were even guessing that they were going to raise the last rate. So, I certainly wouldn't discount that they're not going to do one more. I would be surprised if they didn't, let's say.
Now, with the current economy in Canada here, what are you doing as a portfolio manager? How are you, evolving your strategy for your clients and for people who follow you?
Yeah, so we watch a number of different things from a top-down perspective. So, we're looking at both top-down indicators, looking at the overall markets, but we also look at a lot of sector information as well. And over the last few months, what we've started to see is it looks like the energy sector, which has been really out of favor for the last kind of 9 or 10 months now, is starting to gain some traction. So we've been increasing some of our exposure to the energy sector. And at the same time, we've also, sort of over the last quarter and a half, we've increased our exposure to some of the base metals companies as well in Canada.
Right. Now, Bruce, what stocks are you actually then recommending at this time? And let's also talk about the recent takeover with the previous company you mentioned, Pacific Insight.
Yeah, so Pacific Insight, we've always said that was a great company and had cheap valuation, and obviously somebody discovered that. So there's a takeover offer right now, and then since then a Chinese company has actually come in and offered a higher price, and that'll obviously have to figure out kind of where that all sorts out in the boardroom to see which offer is actually the one that's taken. But yeah, it was a nice premium there for Pacific Insight.
Great. Now, the other new stock picks on your radar?
Yeah, so one of the companies that I've been on here a few times where we've talked about healthcare. And one of the interesting companies that we've just sort of come across and done some work on is a company called Relic Health Technologies.
Okay.
And really interesting little company. So if you take a look at seniors and when they have been in the hospital and then they're discharged out, and typically the home care that they get is very spotty. So it's somebody coming in that maybe monitors them once in a while. This company, Relic, has put together a software package that works with all types of different hardware and basically allows for sort of constant monitoring so that all the caregivers on the team now are linked in together. And so it was a proof of concept a couple years ago, and they've since signed on some regional health authorities, especially in the US, where they're going to start putting the patients that they have and subscribing them onto the service.
And is it a replacement for caregivers, or is it more of like a complementary tool?
It's a complementary tool, because what it'll do is it allows sort of constant monitoring. And it's, with technology these days, what it allows you to do is they have a voice activated, almost a Lexus type of monitor. So that will remind people like, oh, now is time to take your heart rate or take your blood pressure. And they'll also be able to notify their medical staff. So as opposed to having, a nurse come in and check that and say, oh, wow, your blood pressure is really high or something like this, the system will notify the medical staff so that they can actually come and look after these people.
Okay. Now let's gather your comments on the marijuana sector. So now that Ontario has provided some clarity on their plans next year, do you think it's a good time for new investors to hop in if they haven't already?
Well, if you remember back from my past interviews, what we thought is that we thought that there was going to be some cycles to the sector, and that's exactly what's happened. So leading up into the announcement by the federal government that they were going to recreationalize it, all the stocks ran up. We thought that there would be a bunch of euphoria around that, and that's exactly what's happened. And then the summer sort of came, real doldrums. Now with the Ontario announcement of their distribution system, looks like there's starting to be some interest here again. we think that you're probably going to see excitement in the sector again, probably leading up into the fall, maybe just a little bit past Halloween, and then as the sort of reality of how long it's going to take to get everything in place, and the fact that the system's going to be set up, but probably not going to be rolled out on a full scale July 1st, and there's also going to be supply issues. We think that the sector could settle back a little bit, probably give people a time to kind of reload on their investments for a few months, and then ramping up into July of 2018, if that's still the date, then we think that there's going to be more excitement in the sector again.
Are there any stock picks for marijuana that you didn't mention back then in our past interviews?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's transpired. We've in the past talked about sort of the big Canadian ones. There's a few more Canadian ones that have become public now that are kind of interesting. But there's also some Canadian listed companies that are US based that I think are really interesting. So it's a little bit different than the Canadian market, but now some of this US market's really becoming interesting. And one that we particularly like is a company called Friday Night, and they have an operation in Nevada. And so they have actually two parts of their business. So they're cultivating and actually developing a bunch of different extracts, and Nevada is now full recreation, and it was since July 1st of this year.
Nevada and Colorado, if I'm correct.
That's correct, yeah. And Nevada, they obviously get 40+ million visitors into Las Vegas a year, so there's a huge market there. Then they also have an infused business, which is CBD, which is not the hallucinogenic type of marijuana. Right. And that's a new business that's just starting to grow, and you have all types of lotions and that type of thing. Companies really ramping up on a cash flow basis, and it's under the radar. No one's really looking at it.
And you just said that there's some companies that's transpired. Is there a name that we can hear?
Well, so one of the ones is, it's a TSX listed. There's not too many TSX listed, is MedRelief, right? I mean, they have fantastic numbers if you look at, not only what they've sold so far, but if you look at their production and their efficiency in growing, they're probably one of the best out there. It came out on an IPO at $9.50 on the market, and then immediately sold down. And I think there's certainly some value there. They have a good management team.
Right. Obviously, the unveiling of the new plans by the government, there's been also pushback and criticism for the dispensaries that are already operating.
So I mean, this is one of the things where when I talked about the sector going through these cycles, and one might be a little bit of concern that the sector is not going to be ready by July 1st, 2018. That's the type of thing that we're going to have to look at is, you have all these illegal dispensaries. We're going to need supply to be at a point where people can't go to those dispensaries and get it cheaper. And so that's something that's going to have to be taken into account. The law enforcement has also already come out and said that they're not going to be ready.
They're like 0% we're going to be ready, they said.
So, that's something that's going to have to obviously ramp up. There's going to be some things that happen immediately. Probably that's going to be online, and then the distribution is going to be, really what's built out. Ontario's already talked about what their distribution is. I'd be surprised if that's where it ends up. They're only talking about 40 stores initially, and then growing to 150, and there's probably 800 LCBO locations. And if you talk about all the beer stores, there's 2,000. So how does 150 and 2,000 make sense in numbers? I think they're doing this to start with, and then they'll probably grow into some other distribution model, which maybe dispensaries, probably not the dispensaries that are operating now, because why reward the people that have been breaking the law? But I think there's going to be a lot of change in that industry.
For sure. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks very much.